I've broken the rules a little bit because although this is the child and adolescent stream, in fact I'm going to talk about, to some extent, the whole lifespan as far as autism is concerned, because I think it's very important that all of you working with children recognise that the work that you do stays with people throughout their lives, and particularly in terms of giving people self-esteem and confidence. So I'll tell you a little bit about the National Autistic Society before I start. We were started in 1962, so we've been going a long time, and we were started by parents because they weren't getting the support and services that they needed. And our first school was opened in 1965, with our first adult centre being opened in 1974. So we've been going a long time, and we've learned a lot over those years. We now run 8 schools, 80 adult services. We support over 2,000 people and employ around 3,000 staff. But the key thing that we try to do and want to do is to share the knowledge that we've developed over those years as far as practice is concerned. So we do that. We have a very well-used website, which I hope you will all go on to. We get over 4 million unique hits a year on our website, or unique users a year. We have a lot of volunteers around the UK through our branches. We support around 20,000 people through our branches, and we support professionals. We have an online community of practice for professionals where we have members from over 100 countries, all sharing their knowledge, sharing their expertise. And we also try to share what we know about autism with the general public, because recently we asked autistic families and autistic adults what was the biggest barrier to them having a good life. And they largely, almost all, came back to us and said, it's the reactions of the general public. It's things that stop us going out, being part of society, doing the things that everyone else takes for granted, because we feel we're judged. If people see our children behaving in a way that is distressed, they will. We had, I think it was about 38% had been asked to leave somewhere because of either their behaviour or the behaviour of their child. And that made people's worlds get smaller and smaller and smaller. So one of our key aims is to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that autistic people and their families are regarded and welcomed as part of society. One of the things that we're doing is developing autism-friendly spaces for people. We have shopping centres signed up to that. We have airports signed up to be autism-friendly, to make sure that their staff are trained and understand autism. But one of the key ways that we did it quite recently was to develop a short film, which I'm going to show you now, and we've had over 70 million people watching it. What we were really trying to do with this film is to demonstrate that what someone may see as naughty behaviour may be the very understandable reaction of a child to being in an environment where they are overloaded, where they can't process what's happening around them appropriately.
Six, 7, 8, 9.
Take my hand.
No, Alex. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
So it's a very powerful film. And certainly by the way it's been shared around the world, it obviously resonates with people and very much with parents of autistic children. We also have a virtual reality experience which is even more powerful because you are in the place of that young autistic boy. And one of the other things about that film, which we're particularly pleased about, is that Alexander there has a diagnosis of autism. He is autistic, and he is the most fabulous ambassador and explains very clearly how it feels to be him. So if there were some questions earlier about where does it begin and end? What is this autism thing? Is it now so large that everyone is on the spectrum? And of course the answer is no, not at all. But I think I've picked a few scenarios here that perhaps give a flavour of the fact that, as Professor Tatiana said, everyone is very different. So you may have Joanne, who is 12 years old, attending a special school, doesn't use speech to communicate and can't bear noisy environments. You may also have a 19-year-old who is ready to go to college. He finds transitions difficult, but otherwise can manage college and perhaps university. You may also have a little 5-year-old who spends most of her time getting that sensory need, jumping on a trampoline. The way that she gets her needs met is by using her mother's hand. On the other hand, you may have Nicholas at 56, who lives in a group home, supported by staff, communicating using pictures. Or else Peter, 35, an IT professional. I know one man who works at quite a high level at the BBC, who does a lot of their IT, but doesn't communicate using words, communicates only using technology. So it's a very wide range that we're talking about. And certainly in the UK, we are looking at a prevalence rate of 1 in 100. Now, that figure was first found in 2006, then in 2009, and we've just got the new prevalence rates out from the very large government survey, which again looks at around 1 in 100. So that is looking quite a secure number with the diagnostic criteria as they are. So that's 700,000 children and adults in the UK. We don't know what the cause is. There is still a lot of work going on to try and understand what the cause is, but it's very unlikely it will be one thing. We are looking at multiple causal factors, most likely. There are more men than women, more males than female, but we're starting to rethink that, and we think that a lot of girls don't get the diagnosis, and when they do get diagnosis, it's much later. I'll talk about that later. And it is a lifelong condition. If you are an autistic child, you will be an autistic teenager, move on to be an autistic adult and an autistic old person. But with the right support, people can make enormous strides in their lives. And then there are a whole load of co-occurring conditions, such as epilepsy, learning disabilities, depression, and anxiety. And quite recently, we found the highest cause of premature death in autism are epilepsy and suicide, although that was done from a Swedish study, and we're trying to get a study like that done in the UK. But I think that makes sense to me from the people that I've known. So as far as the diagnostic criteria, in DSM, what we're looking at in DSM-5, so the new one, are persistent difficulties with social communication and social interaction, which of course, you know, we've had that in that form for quite a while. And secondly, restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviour, activities and interests. And that now includes sensory behaviours, and that's quite important because previously it didn't, but so many people that we were talking to said, my main child's difficulty is around their sensory differences. They feel things different, they smell things differently, they hear things differently. And these have to be there since early childhood and have to limit and impair everyday functioning. So there is a cut-off limit about the severity of the condition. And I just want to talk about the sensory issues a little bit because they are the thing that for so many people are really limiting. So these are some quotes that we've taken from families. Very hard for my son to keep his clothes on. To him, they feel like cheese graters against his skin. And the seams on my socks feel like pins sticking in my foot. So, these are real barriers, and yet we know some quite simple ways to manage those. We've just linked with the store, Marks and Spencer's in the UK, and they've developed some autism-friendly school uniforms, so where you don't have the tags and you don't have the itchiness and everything, and it's just so lovely. Lots of children, we saw a picture of one earlier, use simple ear defenders, and that, of course, looks like every other teenager. Many people use Erlen glasses to help with the visual sensory differences. So there's lots of things that we can do to support these children. We also, in the UK, have some clinical guidelines. Now, I've just picked a few things from them, but you can look at them on the internet. They are very long and very, very full. But some of the key things that I think are important is that diagnosis should be undertaken by trained and competent professional team. No matter what the diagnostic criteria are, the key thing that people want are people who understand them, who really, who have got a lot of experience in autism, who can understand the nuances, particularly in those people, youngsters that don't present in a very classic way. It's very important that people having a diagnostic assessment should also be assessed for coexisting physical health conditions and mental health problems, because again, these things, we get slightly irritated, I would suggest, as professionals, because the children that we see don't fit neatly into our categories. And the lovely Lorna Wing once had a phrase, well, did have a phrase, which she used a lot, that nature never draws a line without smudging it. So it's, people don't fit in. They don't read our books, which is very, very inconsiderate of them. They don't fit into our categories. They are people, first and foremost. So you need to look at the whole person, the whole individual. And from that, there needs to be an individual care plan. So rather than just saying either you're autistic or you're not autistic, there needs to be something about where is that child's strengths, where are their needs, what sorts of interventions would best suit that individual. And the other thing that is very clearly in the clinical guidelines is that medication should not be used to treat the core symptoms of autism. Associated conditions, perhaps, but not the core symptoms. But the key thing, I spoke to someone recently, a very, very bright man on the autism spectrum, and we were talking about the clinical guidelines and the DSM and everything, and he said to me, the thing that you people need to know is this is about anxiety and processing. And for him, those are the key things, and I think it's really important to bear that in mind all the time, because so often people talk about stress and anxiety being their real barriers to a good life. So Nita Jackson here says, the world outside is sharp and spiky. I'm afraid to go out there. There's something, a quote here about people feeling they're always getting it wrong. So whenever they try to do things, they feel like they're always failing. And this one, always lurking in the back of my mind, is an anxiety about whether or not I'm perceiving things in the same way as people without autism do. So always that worry and fear and anxiety. And these things, anxiety is very, very easy to sort. It's very treatable, and you can put lots of things in place to lower that sense of anxiety. So what about the challenges, the things that I think are really key things that we as professionals need to look at? One is around women and girls, something about aging. I know you're a child stream, but they will all grow older. Criminal justice system and employment. We always have thought that that autism was primarily a boy's condition. We're starting to think that that's not the case. And actually, the reason that most boys get the diagnosis is because so much of the research has been done on boys. It's not been done on older women, many of whom I know and are starting to get diagnoses now. So it's often been, we did a piece of work called Autism in Pink, which again you can get on the internet. It was EU funded. And what we recognized is that women present differently from men, and girls present differently from boys. Often they are better at masking the very obvious traits of autism, as most women are better at fitting in, at communicating. Their communication skills are better, they're better at masking, and often their special interests are much more socially acceptable. So rather than being trains and planets and engine type things, systematizing things, they are more likely to be interested in other people, other girls. Things like soap operas, animals is really, really big. So they're not seen in the same way as the boys. So often education professionals and diagnosticians don't recognize that it's autism, and very often we see young girls showing secondary symptoms, so perhaps eating disorders, self-harming behaviors, vulnerabilities as far as social media use and all that sort of thing, where actually the underlying cause is the fact that they are autistic, and that hasn't been looked at. So I think there's a big piece around girls. This is quite interesting in that if you look at the figure at the bottom, you'll see the difference in the research. So we know an awful lot more about children. There is less about adolescents, less about adults, and virtually nothing about autism in older people. So we still need to understand what dementia looks like in autism. We need to understand the health issues that the older autistic people experience. And it is only now that first generation of people who were diagnosed in the 60s are coming into their older age. I've been in this field when I was sitting there, I worked it out. I've been involved for 37 years. So, you know, and I was working with 20-year-olds then. So they're all the same age as me. And, you know, we all get older. Is it? I'll just finish quickly. One of the other things is around employment. We need to make sure that not only young people getting the skills that they need to be able to participate in employment, but we need to make sure that interview techniques and environments are actually friendly for autistic people who often can bring real skills. I don't know if that translates well into Russian, but I think it's very interesting. And we further know that many young people, because of their vulnerabilities, end up in the criminal justice system, often because they want friends, they are vulnerable to other young people. And we've recently linked with a prison, with Feltham Young Offenders Institute, and they have now got autism-friendly status. So all of their staff have been trained. There is a small diagnostic service there, and we know there's a slightly higher, there's 4.5% of people in Feltham that have an autistic spectrum disorder. But I think one of the themes that I've heard today a lot is around, rather than trying to stop people's mental distress, what we really need to do is try to help people to achieve good lives. And when we ask autistic people what that is, it's largely about acceptance and appreciation. They need skills, support, and tools to manage that anxiety and depression support to manage daily life, and a phrase that Peter Vermeulen from Belgium, a really lovely researcher, says we need to try to help people, rather than just to be neurotypically happy, to be autistically happy. And these are our contact sites and my contact. Thank you very much.
Carol, I think we have some time for questions.
Good.
I think the audience will not forgive us. Please go ahead.
Уважаемая госпожа Кэрол, в вашей презентации вы сказали о том, что в Великобритании создаются специальные торговые точки для аутистов. Правильно я понял, что это специальные торговые точки для них, для того, чтобы они преодолевали тревогу и страхи? Или это обучение вот этих специалистов, работающих в торговых точках, чтобы они умели взаимодействовать с детьми или людьми, скажем так, имеющими проблемы аутистического характера?
Yes, it's not special stores. What we are doing is we've made some standards of what we think good, an autism-friendly environment should look like, and that is that all the staff have to have some basic training in autism. There has to be some clear instructions so that families know what they can do, where things are, but it's mainly about that awareness. So, for instance, there are some shopping centres. There's one in Manchester that has just received the award. And all staff have got some training. They've seen the film. They understand what families are looking for. And even the security guards have had that awareness. And I know there was an incident where a little boy went into one of the fountains and was playing in the fountain. And the security guard thought, rather than that being just a naughty boy, perhaps that's autism. And he spoke to the parent, and the parent contacted us and said they were so lovely, and they managed to get the boy out of the fountain, but in an understanding and gentle way. So it's just that little bit of understanding that we're trying to get. We know that not everyone will or should be autism experts. That's quite unrealistic. But it's about there being an awareness that if they see unusual behavior, it might be autism.
Спасибо. Это очень хороший пример для той же социальной рекламы, который, наверное, нужен любому человеку в социальной сфере, где он сталкивается с человеком, не похожим на себя и реагирующим немножко по-другому. Спасибо большое.
I think this is it. Carol, do you want to just address the question of, the earlier question of whether we're overdiagnosing autism? Because this is something we hear in the UK and which we've heard in the last decade or two. Because if you remember, the prevalence figures for autism, when we started practicing, were something like 0.4
4 in every 10,000.
4 in every 10,000, 0.004%. It was a very rare condition, and here we are. We've ended up with 1%.
Yes.
How do you respond to those sort of challenges?
It's interesting. It has changed because the group, certainly that I started working with, all had learning disabilities. So it was always with learning disabilities and usually quite very high support needs. That has changed, and I think it's really because of that recognition of some of the difficulties that those old group had. Certainly when Lorna Wing developed the concept of Asperger syndrome, what she was seeing in her clinics were people with quite good cognitive skills coming into her clinics who still had those difficulties with social interaction, with communication, the same difficulties that people with far more serious condition had. And that was a recognition, I think, that the difficulties that people had, it didn't stop with their cognitive functioning. So no matter how high their cognitive functioning was, they were still struggling with some really basic things in their lives around interacting with other people, making relationships, communicating, understanding the world around them. Now, whether we've got it I don't think we'll ever think, oh, we've got it right. It's an ever-changing situation. But certainly we do know a lot more children are getting help than they used to be. A lot more people are getting very specific and tailored education. They are getting help in other parts of their lives and in a way that they never used to. So I see it as generally a good thing.